It's U of L Today on 93.9 The Phil. Here's your host, Mark Hebert.
Well, happy holidays, everyone. Welcome to U of L Today with Mark Hebert on 93.9 The Phil. So glad you're joining us during the holiday season. Hope you got all your shopping done and all the food bought for all the relatives you're going to have over to your house in the next couple of weeks. All right, so what have we got on U of L Today? Well, on the show today, do black kids have a different view of their teachers than white kids? U of L researchers have looked into this and the impact it may or may not be having on the achievement gap between black and white students, and we'll talk to those researchers. But first, many of you have heard of the federal Superfund sites, the landfills and other places, including the Valley of the Drums in southwest Jefferson County, where industries were dumping millions of gallons of toxic waste back in the 1950s through the 1980s. Now, U of L has joined a select group of universities receiving a big federal grant to study the impact of those environmental hazards on people's health. Sanjay Srivastava is a researcher in the cardiovascular medicine department at U of L, who's heading the new Superfund Research Center at U of L. Sanjay, good to see you.
Good morning.
How you doing?
Pretty good. Happy holidays, everyone.
Yes, happy holidays, everyone. All right. You got a lot of money from the feds, didn't you, for a new Superfund Research Center. Tell us what that is.
We have got a lot of work to do.
Well, you got money to do it with. Right? How much was the grant, first off?
The grant is about $6.8 million over 5 years.
From
National Institute of Health.
Okay.
And so primarily this center is going to focus on cardiometabolic disease, which could be exacerbated by air pollution. As we know, air pollution accounts for about 6 million deaths per year, which are premature deaths, which is about 2/3 of the total 9 million premature death by total pollution in general. And most of the air pollution death, we don't know what the causes are. So we believe that a set of chemicals, what we call volatile organic compounds, they are the major culprits. They can cause insulin resistance. They can cause vascular damage. They can cause liver disease, and they can cause heart disease. So those, based on the scientific literature which is available, both clinical and preclinical data, and some of the studies ongoing in our center, we strongly believe that these volatile organic compound, or VOCs as we abbreviate them, really contribute to the air pollution associated cell death. Now, going back to this center part, so this program is primarily going to focus in the West Louisville area, and the site we are studying is Lee's Lane site, where
that's over in Rubbertown, right?
That's in the Rubbertown area, yeah, in the West Louisville area. So what we are going to do is we are going to do a population-based study where we will enroll 500 subjects from various areas with varying level of pollution, and we will do the continuous air monitoring, and then we will also be doing the mobile air monitoring. So this is a very new way of looking at the air pollution in general, because usually it's a snapshot thing. People just monitor for some time.
In a particular spot, right?
In a particular spot. But here we are going to map this area where all these our participants are going to be, and then we will associate the air pollution level or these volatile organic compound which are there in the air with the health outcomes. And then we will follow these subjects after 18 months and then after 36 months to see if there is a progression of disease with the exposures.
We're talking with Sanjay Srivastava, who's the new head of the Superfund Research Center at the University of Louisville. Just got a big federal grant for that. The Lee's Lane landfill, though, that was stuff that was buried, toxic chemicals and things that were buried in the ground. So how would stuff that was buried in the ground still impact potentially air pollution and what's in the air in that area years later?
So there are many ways that these chemicals can come out. One of the way is when we have rain or their water level increases, then several of these chemicals can leach out. They can go in the soil, they can go in the water, they can come out in the vapor phase. And not only these volatile organic compound could be seen outside in the outside air, there's also a possibility that if there is a seepage in the basement inside also, that these could be coming out. So a lot of this could be coming out in the vapor phase.
Gotcha.
And in addition to that, there are other sources of generation of volatile organic compounds like automobile exhaust and things like that. So there are
other things that could contribute to this, not just what's in that old landfill.
No, yeah. I mean, that landfill, of course, is one of the major thrust area that we are studying, but there are other sources for these chemicals.
Well, like Rubbertown has a number of industrial plants that could be contributing to stuff in the air.
Correct. And some of the chemicals that we are studying, which are of local interest, are vinyl chloride and butadiene, which were really a big thing in the Rubbertown area. We were like
those used to make tires.
Those are primarily in the tire industries and rubber industries and so forth. So in some of the pilot studies that we have done, we detected increased levels of some of these volatile organic compounds, like butadiene, which is, of course, Rubbertown used to make quite a lot of that, and trichloroethylene, TCE, what we call. And the levels of these chemicals were increased in the urine of some of the study subjects that we enrolled in the study. So that shows that there is a strong correlation with the Rubbertown residence area and the levels of these pollutants.
So U of L's role in this, you've already been, U of L, maybe not you, but others at U of L have been studying what's going on in West Louisville around the Rubbertown area in the air over there already. So you've got some data already, correct? And then you're going to do some increasing studies through the new center to test people who live in that area over the next 18 to 36 months, right?
That's correct. The project is for about 5 years, but it will take some time to enroll the study population, and then we will build on that. So, as you know, UFL has been studying air pollution levels in that area for almost 20 years. But we don't have the data on the health effects side. And we have not done a detailed, rigorous monitoring as we can do now with the available technology and resources that we have at hand to study this topic. So I think it's going to take it to a next level, a different level altogether. And then the most important thing is that we are doing a prospective study, so that can tell us the association, how the disease could be progressing in time. So that part has not been done. And this is very unique in that regard, that I don't believe that there is any center in the world which is looking at the volatile organic compounds and cardiometabolic health outcomes. So,
and with the impact on your heart, basically, right?
Yes, heart and diabetes. I mean, and obesity, those are the major problem in the Kentucky area, and in particular, but nationwide and even at the international level.
You mentioned before the break about these VOCs, volatile organic chemicals, right? Is that what they're called? And their impact on diabetes, obesity, hearts, those kinds of things. Is there any evidence out there elsewhere in the United States, at any of these other research universities that are working with the EPA or NIH, is there any evidence that there is an impact from what was buried in the ground years ago from these Superfund sites having an impact on those things you just mentioned?
Not on those chemicals per se, but there are other centers which are looking at other chemicals and various health outcomes, including cancer and metabolic disorders and so forth. But there is not a center, at least in the Superfund program, which focuses on the cardiometabolic health. That's one thing. And there isn't a center which is studying volatile organic compounds or VOCs. But there are others independent studies, independent of these centers, that people have done, which show the association of some of the volatile organic compound. One chemical is called acrolein, which is a very reactive chemical. And then people have studied that quite a bit and on various health outcomes, not so much on the heart disease and diabetes part, but inflammation and respiratory disease and so forth.
Right.
So adverse health effects of these volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, are known, but not much is known about diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular health, and that's why we are studying that, and that's what our focus of our study is.
Gotcha. And there are 250 some odd, I think, Superfund sites around the United States, and there's already been some studies by other universities in some of those areas, right? What have those studies found? You said they found some link between cancers and those kinds of things. Have there been any studies that have shown that folks who live within 2 miles of a Superfund site in Michigan got pancreatic cancer at a higher rate than everybody else or something?
Yes, there are, and actually there were also some reports. This is again several years back, which actually looked for some of these VOCs also. That people living in the vicinity of the Superfund sites or hazardous waste site, they had increased incidence of stroke. And that was a major discovery. I mean, like, it has been almost 30 years, but it has not been followed up. Apart from that, people have looked at the association of metals quite a bit, and their effects on the various health outcomes. One of the major study which is ongoing at the Columbia Superfund Center, that where they're looking at arsenic as one of the metalloid and health effects. And so they say that association of arsenic levels with cardiovascular disease, so especially the artery disease, and there is a strong correlation that has developed from there, and that has. So there are a lot of very good research which is ongoing, and which suggests that these hazardous waste sites and people living in that area are likely to be at increased risk for various toxicants.
We're talking with Srivastava from the University of Louisville. Well, one more question. I do have one more question here about the Lee's Lane landfill in Louisville. What are some of the things that you know were buried there years ago? Are we talking paint? We talking rubber products, gasoline?
These are mostly industrial solvents. So that's why these are in large quantities, and that's why we are studying VOCs, because most of the industrial solvents are VOCs, or they generate a large amount of VOCs. So that's why we are uniquely poised to do that, because we are in the close vicinity of this area.
Gotcha. All right. Talk about the health fair you've got coming up.
Yes. So UFL is planning to have a health fair in the West Louisville area, and we'll kick it off sometime in the spring. We have not decided the dates yet. So we will do perhaps one or maybe two health fairs, and this is just for the West Louisville community. Will provide health services where we'll take the medical vans from UFL, and a lot of physicians and nurses will be available on site, and we will provide the care that we can provide, and do some testing of various parameters of the health outcomes. At the same time, we will also have community engagement people who can let the people know about the study and potential outcome and so forth.
Very good. All right, Sanjay Srivastava, appreciate you being on the show. If you're a teacher, you probably try to treat all of your students the same. At least we hope you do. You try to act the same around all of them, no matter what sex or race they are or their family backgrounds. But how do African-American kids see their teachers? Patrick Possel and Jason Immekus are both professors in U of L's College of Education. They've taken a look at how students of different races view their teachers and interact with those teachers. Gentlemen, good to see you. Patrick, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Mark.
Thank you for having us.
Y'all set on holiday gift buying, and y'all set with that?
No.
Moving right along.
Still working.
Yeah, still working on it. All right. Let's talk about this study that you guys did, and one of you can start and just tell us what you looked at in terms of African American students and white students and how they view their teachers.
So maybe let's start a little bit with a bigger picture. So
Okay.
when you think about it, we know there are racial, ethnic differences in achievement, in mental health actually, and in disciplinary actions, so in school suspension, out school suspension, and one of the and we also know that teaching behavior impacts all these variables. So we were actually wondering, is there a difference in how students perceive their teachers? So how students think the teachers behaves towards them?
Okay.
That's basically what we try to do in actually multiple studies now.
Okay.
And so I think your listeners are probably on board here when you think about, okay, we know there are differences, we know African Americans struggle more than European Americans. So I think, at least for me, it seemed clear there would be differences.
The differences in their perception of their
Yes.
teachers' behavior.
Yes.
Okay.
And to our big surprise, actually, there were basically no differences. So these kids assume or see their teachers in a very similar way, no matter what race the students have.
Huh. And that does surprise me too.
Yes,
So
that's the reason why we do research, right, and not speculate.
you can surprise people like us. So Jason, when you got these results back, you said, well, we were hoping to show that maybe the teacher's behavior had a dramatic impact on students' test scores and those kinds of things, and you came back and apparently they don't, right? Or you
Right.
did not say that?
Well, we can't really say that with this particular data set just because this is actually a bigger project with Patrick. He's been doing some inroads with this. I've been at U of L since 2014. We did a lot of outcome disparity research when I was at Fresno State in California. And with this particular work, this is we've particularly looked at, if we're going to go in and look at teacher perceptions, student-teacher interactions, how do we go about measuring this? How do we capture this? We can kind of make these larger generalizations across school sites. And so the work specifically that we focused on was some work Patrick's done around this, developing some measurement instruments on this. And one of his grad students, Bridget Colley, this was some of her work here too. And so we just went in and kind of look at, how did these instruments function to kind of allow us to go in there. And this is one case where we didn't find the differences across in terms of positive, negative interactions, differences between white and black students. But in this case, this is a positive outcome. This is something we'd want to see. So it's kind of digging a little bit deeper around what other factors could go on within the classroom that could affect the way in which students, way we look at their behavior and academic outcomes.
And just to piggyback a little bit on what Jason just said, it is indeed teaching behavior, and we really say teaching behavior, not necessarily teacher behavior, to make it very specific what we are talking about, predicts all these outcomes. The point is, it seems there is no difference between black and white students. That's basically the big message here. Yes, we can very clearly say, actually, what we do is we split teaching behavior in 4 categories. We have what we call organizational. It's basically exactly what the word says. How do you organize your classroom? Instructional, that's really what the most people understand when they talk about teaching. Then we have social emotional. Basically, do you create an accepting atmosphere? That's what the most research teams work on, actually. And we found a couple of years ago a 4th type, actually, what we simply summarize as negative teaching behavior. That is basically it is being inconsistent and or punishing. So these 4 types predict actually outcomes, particularly actually negative teaching behavior. And when you think about it, that's very typical. That's the same with parenting.
Right.
We had a show a couple of weeks ago where we talked about parenting. It was exactly the same. If you're inconsistent, if you punish, that's not necessarily the best strategy. What we found in this study is really there's no difference between these 2 races that we looked into.
Talking to Patrick Possel and Jason Immekus from the College of Education at the University of Louisville, talking about their study looking at black and white students and their perceptions of their teachers' behavior. How old were these kids that you talked to? Well, I assume you talked to them, right? And watched.
Yeah.
How old were they?
Sorry, go ahead.
Middle school youth?
Yeah.
Middle
This
school youth.
particular one?
Is it possible that that view changes as they get older? As kids get in high school, they think, my teacher is treating me differently, or my teacher's behavior is impacting me as opposed to younger kids?
Yes, actually, thank you for asking this question, because another of my grad students works on a paper where she looks exactly actually in the interaction between biological sex and age in kids, and looks into basically discrimination by teachers. And what she finds is very clearly that particularly actually male African Americans experience that they get more discriminated when they get older. And the kind of, when you think
Was that
about
just
it,
their perception, or do they actually get discriminated against
that's
by
a very
teachers?
good question. But the point is, of course, always how do you measure discrimination if you do not ask the person that feels discriminated? How would you measure that? So it is,
Right.
but it's good that you point this out. It is always self-report.
Right.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing.
And so she found that African American males at least feel that they're being discriminated
Yes.
against, and
When they
feel
get
their
older,
teachers
particularly.
are treating them differently. And they're high school students, I
yes.
assume.
And that's the point. When they move on from middle school to high school, that changes. And when you think about probably the perception that many people might have, think about it. Do you feel more threatened by a younger person or by a more adult-looking person? I think that's simply things that we have to look into as society.
All right. And Jason Immekus, when you looked at this, I know you were just looking at African American and white students in middle school. Did you look at their, did you weigh in what their social background was, whether they had rich parents, poor parents, or was it simply based on their race?
This one was particularly just based off race. We just didn't have enough of that information. The data that we're working with, it actually started within a course I was offering last year, and so his student Bridget was working with this data, so we just kind of extended the analyses beyond the class. And again, if we're going to look at the income, how do we best measure that? And sometimes schools just measure it through eligibility for free
lunch,
reduced lunch, and
right.
that's really not the best proxy for that. That would be a limitation. That would be definitely a next steps there to kind of what would be the most accurate way to get the income factor involved.
So what do you do with this study? I mean, when you go to teachers, you say, look, black and white students look at you the same, basically. Does that provide any good feedback for them? Or it's like, well, of course they do, because I treat them all the same.
In this case, what Jason said is actually a good outcome, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes this is indeed, yes, it's kind of a little bit what you said. They're like, yes, of course, that's what I do. That's a great message. Now let's focus on what is actually positive for all your students in the classroom, no matter if black and white, or rich and poor, or I don't know, male or female, or green and yellow, or whatever.
Right.
So it is. Now the next logical step is what is really beneficial for all the students, and we know, be not inconsistent. That would be the very first step. Be consistent. Be not
Right.
threatening.
Right. Yeah, we're talking Patrick Possel and Jason Immekus from the College of Education at U of L. We've talked before, and you mentioned it a little bit just a second ago, about this one of these three other areas that you've looked at in terms of teaching, in terms of teachers that get angry and maybe blow their stack a little bit with their students. Talk a little bit about that study and what you found.
Let me start off with, of course, it's very hard. Think about it. You have 7 periods a day. You have, 20 plus kids in a room. It is a quite stressful job. So let's start there with that we know this.
Yeah, it's a stressful job. I
yes,
would do it.
Exactly,
Tough
exactly.
job, especially middle school.
Yes.
I mean,
Real
elementary kids, high school
Yes.
kids, they can probably handle. Middle school, I don't know.
So just let's start there. We know it is a hard job. And you have this 20 kids around, and the one kid over there, I don't know, does what they are supposed to do. On the other end of the room, they're chit-chatting, and somewhere in the middle, I don't know, they're throwing chairs. But yeah, I mean, that is what happens sometimes. So we know how hard it is. Nevertheless, this negative teaching behavior, how we call it, is a problem. Basically, it's exactly what you say. Blowing up, basically. But I think to a certain degree, that happens to all of us from time to time. Being consistent is probably the other element that is maybe even more important. Try, when you say, I do X, Y, and Z, really try to do this. Follow up on it. Not today I'm in a good mood, so I let it slip when you throw a chair, and tomorrow I'm in a bad mood, and now I respond to it. Or I respond to you, Mark, and tell you, go over in the corner when you chit-chat with your neighbor, and to Jason, I accept it. Mm-hmm. That's more the problems. are the things that we
There's
see.
inconsistencies,
Yes.
which is almost human. I
It
mean,
is. It is.
bosses do that all the time. There are a lot
Yes,
of bosses
and
that are
parents do
inconsistent.
this,
Parents
and
do the
I do
same
this
thing.
with my students. That's indeed, yeah.
Well, what do you consider a negative teaching behavior? What is that? Can one of you describe what that is?
I think we're already talking
that
about
what
it.
that
It's
is? That's what
basically,
that is?
yes,
Just
just
being
being
inconsistent?
inconsistent. I
But there are
exaggerate a
some
little
teachers
bit.
that I think students just consider as the mean teacher. Is that a negative teaching behavior?
It depends a little bit on what you mean with mean. So when I think back,
Well, I think kids would say, it's somebody that is always yelling and always threatening to, we're not going to be able to do a student break it for half an hour if you kids don't behave in class, that kind of stuff.
okay, if this is your definition, then I would say
that
yes,
negative?
that describes it well. While a strict teacher, when you think about it, quite often kids actually like a strict teacher who says, that's the rules, we follow the rules, period. That's the best teacher that I still remember.
Kind of know what the standards of expectations are.
Yes.
If you're in here, this is how you treat yourself, treat others, and you're consistent across. And too, the students need to be consistent too, how they treat each others
Yes.
and the teachers and one another in the class.
So how do you teach that in the College of Education to your students that want to be future teachers?
That's exactly the point. That's sometimes very, very hard. I mean, partially it is basically part of classroom management, right? It's not only teaching it, but what can I do instead? But
Well, Jason, you said you just wrapped up with your finals and stuff
Correct.
with your students. Well, when you talk to them in class, I assume they want to be future teachers, right?
A
lot of them.
A lot of them do.
Okay. So how do you handle that? How do you go about saying, you need to set aside as best you can your emotions as a teacher to try and handle the class all the same and in a consistent manner?
It's tough because you develop, working relationships with the students in the classroom and outside the classroom. Many of the students we have in our classes work with our colleagues. And so we interact, but when we're in the classroom, I'm very transparent. Here's what we're here for. Here are the expectations. Here's the syllabus. And for the assignments, you have to be very careful with the feedback you provide inside and outside the classroom because students talk. And so you just want to be that, consistent, hold that level of standards and be able to kind of just always explain why you're doing something and the way you're doing and kind of where you want them to end up. It's something that takes considerable time to do. And even with the training of teachers, what you're doing within a training program. And then once they get out into a school, and this is with anything, it can be very hard to kind of maintain the way in which you're trained to something once you get into a new culture, a new setting that has its own set of norms and expectations.
Real quick, and then we need to wrap this up. So going forward, when teachers come back for training and they come to the College of Education looking for some updates on what they should be doing, what do you guys tell them in terms of their training and what they should know based on your research?
I think Jason summarized it. Be consistent.
Be consistent.
So basically, be consistent, and how does it actually look like? How can you do this? So, for example, it is very great to have a rules poster in the classroom. If you do not go over it on a regular basis, that means at least once a week. Why, as a kid, would I remember this?
Mm-hmm. It's just something on the wall.
Exactly. And there's so much stuff on the wall. And then referring back to it, this is why I respond. We had this agreement, no cell phones out. Sorry.
Okay, gotcha. All right, Patrick Possel, Jason Immekus. Thanks for listening to U of L Today with Mark Hebert. We are U of L.